Okay, so we're going to talk about how some ways of building a welcoming and inclusive syllabus. For many students, that's the first exposure, unless you send them a video or you send them a welcome email in your class. The syllabus is really the students' often first exposure to your class. And often it's because you've uploaded it to Blackboard and students see that before you actually meet or before you start any other activities within the class. And so it does provide this first impression. And the question is, what sort of impression do you want to share with students? I think back to some of the syllabi I've created, and I think about some of the syllabi when I was department chair that some students shared with me. I won't mention some specific cases, but and also I am thinking one, and I want to get that out of my mind. Sorry. And also I'm thinking about how so many, in general, how so many of our syllabi look like they were written by a team of lawyers who are educating any possible infraction that students might ever conceivably do, describing all the penalties that you might impose for all those things. And they often read as a very formal, very legalistic type document. And college requirements in general, and that's true everywhere, tend to make that a little worse by having all these required syllabus statements that we have to include. And the intent of that is very good, but it often becomes a really impersonal sort of document that does not necessarily build this sort of human connection with your students. And, we had that talk yesterday on relationship-rich education. And this formal document, which many people see as a contract, even though courts, by the way, generally don't treat it as a legal document. And well, in any case, the basic suggestion of many people who've done a lot of work with this is you may want to make your syllabus a little bit more user-friendly, a little bit more welcoming. Ken Bain talks about the promising syllabus. He's recently changed the name to an invitational syllabus, but basically the notion is, if you really want to get students involved in your class and help build intrinsic motivation and build curiosity, what he suggests doing, and many people have followed this up and found that it does seem to be helpful in building class community and encouraging student retention, completion of courses, and also student success, is start by talking not about all the requirements, not about the schedule of the course, not about all the work that students have to do, but talk about what the successful completion of the course will allow them to do that they can't necessarily do well now. So focus on what skills they'll be able to acquire. What will the successful completion of this course give students in terms of training or preparation for future careers, or training or preparation for other things in their lives, or just enriching their lives in some ways, enriching their understanding of the world around them in ways that they might not be able to do as easily now without what this course will deliver to them. So start off by just talking about some of the big questions that this class will allow students to answer that they might not be able to answer as easily if they don't take this class. So start off by promising that if you do all the things that we're going to do in this class, you're going to be able to be richer in your life in some way in the future. So start off by inviting students into the class and promising them that this is what will happen if they do all the things you're going to be doing over the course of the semester. And then from there, work back and say, and in order to be able to do this, you must develop these skills. You must be able to improve these things. You must be able to be better at doing these things, or you must acquire this knowledge in order to be able to achieve those goals. So start by the outcomes, sort of like a backward design process when you're building a course, and then work backwards to, these are the things that are necessary in order to achieve the goals, and use that to explain all the activities, but tie them all to the overall course objectives. So that's the broad approach to this. It activates student curiosity. It provides intrinsic motivation. And again, one of the things to think about when you do this, and Ken Bain gave a syllabus workshop here about 12 years ago now, where people spent about 3 hours redesigning their syllabi. And he suggests starting with the question of, what are the big questions that this class can answer? And build that in to the syllabus. And then the rest of it is ways of fulfilling that promise. And instead of talking about the requirements and assignments, talk about these course activities as necessary steps that you need to complete to get to that goal. And then the next thing you should address in that promising syllabus is, well, how will you know that you've achieved those goals? How will I know in assigning grades for you that you've achieved those goals? And then build up saying, well, we have to assess your progress on here, and talk about the assessment processes in your class, how you're going to evaluate. Instead of having a section that just says, how will you be evaluated, maybe say, how will you know that you've achieved those goals? And say, these are the things we'll be doing to assess your progress towards these goals. And you might want to include the weights and so forth and details at that point, but focus more on those things than the more legalistic type approach. And also, one thing you may want to do in designing a syllabus is have students reflect on their learning, engage in some metacognitive process where they may write up a reflection on what they've learned, or have them periodically reflect on their learning, which could be done through a blog, it could be done through a journal, it could be done through an assignment submission, or it could be part of other assignments, or it could be part of a discussion board where students reflect on what they've learned in the course and how that may or may not be, how that may be useful or perhaps not useful in their future careers or future education. So you could build into this assessment some having students improve their own understanding of what they've learned, because when you're working through a course and you're struggling to jump through all the hoops in the course, it's often easy to forget how much you've actually learned. I think Josh may remember this. When Susan Coltrap McQuinn had students work on a COIL project, she had them reflect on what they learned, and there was a lot of negative opinions in students' initial evaluations. And then she asked them a little bit later, she talked about this in a presentation she gave on her COIL course. And one of the things she said, she revised the question a little bit the next time she asked it and said, what have you learned by this process of working with students from another country that may be useful to you in your future career or in your future life? And there was this dramatic turnaround in students' perception of that course, because they were able now to reflect not just about the challenges that they face in terms of communication and scheduling and other things. They were able to talk about how they've learned how they can work with students from other cultures and how they could work using these online tools to be able to communicate and engage in real-time sharing of materials and joint creation of work. And it became a very different evaluation when students were able to step back and reflect on the skills they've actually developed, because that's easy to lose while you're in the midst of a course. And that can help maintain student motivation and enthusiasm for the course. One approach you may want to consider is, this is a term that comes from the history discipline. The concept is uncoverage, where we often focus, and especially in many disciplines where there's a very well-defined body of knowledge that you have to cover in your introductory classes, and that tends to grow over time, where textbooks generally tend to get thicker and thicker, and they tend not to remove much material. They just keep adding more and more things to it. So one of the things you can ask yourself is it possible perhaps to drop some of the things from your syllabus and focus on perhaps deeper learning? In some disciplines, that's not possible. There's not a lot you can take out of a Calc 1 class because students have to be able to progress to Calc 2 and so forth. But if it's possible to narrow the range of topics and focus on topics in more depth, that may actually be better in achieving long-term learning than if you try a very thin layer of understanding on many different things. So it's that trade-off between breadth and depth of discussion in your classes. And and the usual thing, and this goes back to the backwards design approach, is when you're building a syllabus and designing the course, think about what you want students to remember a year later or 5 years later, and focus more on those things than all the details that we often focus on. Because if you know that students are going to forget some things within 6 months or a month, those are perhaps not the things we should focus as much efforts on in the class, unless they're helpful in achieving other goals. make the connections between the learning objectives at both the course level and in each module, each component you're working on, the learning activities and the assessment explicit to students and transparent to students so that they know what they're going to be tested on. They know how it relates to the overall course objectives, and they know how the learning activities connect to it. And make that clear, because while it may be clear to us when we're building the course, it's not always clear to students. And it's particularly often less clear in practice to students who are first generation students who don't have the same sort of background as students who are continuing generation students. So make it clear to students why they're doing things they're doing so they don't think it's just busy work or you're just overloading them with work. Make it clear to them that these are necessary steps in order to build the skills that they need to do to get to the final goals of the course. Another thing that comes up in a lot of discussion is trying to decolonize your syllabus. That, you know, in many disciplines, there's often a bit of a bias in who the authors are that are being considered, who the topics are that are being considered. There's often a focus primarily on Western approaches when there may be very good approaches coming from other cultures. And also in the examples we use, you know, many of the writers in our disciplines, many of the leading figures may all be white males in some cases, or they may all be white, or they may all be from the US. And, you know, a growing share of our students are not from those groups. That may have worked pretty well back in the 1940s and 50s, but many of our students may not see themselves in the discipline. And in some cases, that's really challenging. I saw a presentation once by someone who, actually it was in the Cornell MOOC on inclusive teaching, where someone who is gay said that, you know, one of the things that happened is there was no discussion of literature from gay writers in this particular course. And the professor mentioned, well, at the time that we're studying in early American literature or whatever the period was, you know, that was just not something that was well publicized. That there may very well have been many gay writers, but that was suppressed. And they put it in the context of, you know, these groups are underrepresented. And similarly, you know, if you're from a group that's underrepresented in a discipline, you know, many people find it helpful just to mention that, you know, in this discipline, we have seen underrepresented. We've seen some groups being underrepresented, and that's something that needs to change. But that is a shortcoming of the literature in this discipline. So, you know, if you can find examples of cultural examples, even if you're just using slides, finding examples that are not stereotypical middle-class culture in illustrating some of the concepts, that can help a little bit, you know, in your class readings, in the examples and images you use on your slides. And also, you know, a lot of the textbooks examples may not always be relevant to students in your classes. And if you can find examples that will be relevant for students or allow students to share their own ways in which they can connect their own experiences to the concepts you're using, that can be helpful. You know, for example, if you want students to apply concepts in your class, a really simple thing you can do is give them assignments where they have to take examples from their own lives or of people they know and use the analysis that you're using in class to explain those examples so that they can see how the content you're studying is actually relevant, even if there's no direct representation in the group, in the class of the groups they maybe belong to. But to the extent to which you can have diverse representation, it really can help make the class feel more inclusive to all the participants. Use UDL principles of multiple means of expression and so forth. And basically what this means is find lots of examples of ways of conveying knowledge. Some of it could be reading, some of it could be videos, some of it could be audio, podcasts, and such things. And also give students opportunities to express themselves in ways they're comfortable with. For example, you know, one thing that many people have been using the last few years is something called an unessay, where instead of having students write a typical essay, you let them create materials in whatever technique they want, where it could be a video recording, it could be a narration, it could be a podcast, it could be a piece of artwork, it could be a song, it could be. Give students flexibility where possible so that they can bring their own skills and talents to it in a way that works. For example, when we moved online, one of the advice that we gave to lots of people is, instead of having many of our students do much of their work when they were working remotely on smartphones. It's really hard to write a paper on a smartphone. It can be done, and some of our students have been doing it, but maybe instead of having them write a paper on something or even an essay on something, let them use a smartphone to record a video. It could be a documentary, it could be just a narration, it could be a PowerPoint slideshow or something that they narrate. But give students ways that work for them and for the resources they have, especially if we end up in a remote environment, which we may at times, or at least many of our students may this semester. And yeah, these are the UDL principles, giving students multiple means of engaging with the content, which could involve having many different voices in the class, many different examples. You could provide multiple means of representation, and action and expression, which is basically give students lots of ways to interact with the material and multiple ways to share their knowledge, if possible. One approach that has often been suggested is, instead of trying to completely build a course around these principles, you could use the principle of just changing one thing, the +1 strategy. Just add one additional way of letting students engage with the material or interact with the material or to express their knowledge. And if you do that every semester, every year, you can build a fairly rich UDL course over time. Another thing you can do in terms of a syllabus is you could use hypothesis or now perusal to post your syllabus as a PDF document, but let students annotate it. Let them make suggestions for changes that you could then discuss. Let them raise questions that you can then answer, and so forth. So this is an option you might use. And what I've used in at least extensively in one of my classes and a little less extensively in another one of my upper level classes is I don't really form the whole syllabus on the first day for my capstone course. What I do is I just say, these are the required components. These are the learning objectives for our capstone course. You're going to have to be able to you're going to have to use the knowledge you've acquired other classes and use that to explain social and political issues and so forth. And also you have to be able to develop your skills in presenting knowledge and so forth. So there's a list of things that are part of the course description that have to be there in some form. But then we actually talk about how we're going to do it. What type of assignments are they going to use? Are they going to work on individual projects? Are they going to work in groups? Are they going to write term papers? Are they going to do some other way of sharing the work? And that's all determined in the first day of the class. The class meets once a week. So that first day, we actually decide what we're going to do, how we're going to assess it, how they're going to be evaluated. And we will come up in some cases with rubrics, and sometimes they develop over time. But giving students a say in their course structure when feasible can be a really good way of helping build a more inclusive class environment. Because if students come up with measures of what they're going to do and how they're going to be evaluated on it, they're going to buy into that a lot more than if it feels externally imposed on them. You become less of an authoritarian figure and more as, part of this group that's working with them to help them be successful in achieving the goals of the course. And using annotation tools is a really good way of doing it. You could also post it in Google Docs and let people comment on it and give that ability too. So that's a second way of doing it. Another approach is what's been called a liquid syllabus. That was, I know the person who does it. She works with community colleges in California, and I can't remember her name right now. But it's a concept where the syllabus is not in the course, it's actually out on the web typically. It could be a Google site, it could be some other form of web page, but basically the syllabus becomes a living document that you can add to and modify and expand over the course of the semester. And it also becomes something that students can see before they sign up for the class, and they can see later, and they can easily refer to, and it could grow. You know, you could provide all the material students need, provide their rubrics, you could provide guidance, you could provide examples from past classes, you could link to resources, YouTube sites, and other things that can help students work their way through the course. And you can update it periodically, as if questions arise during the term, you can add more detail to it very easily. And often a liquid syllabus contains a friendly welcome video. And if you do a search for a liquid syllabus, you'll find lots of examples for that. And in general, a welcome video is a nice thing to include with an online course or a face-to-face class, because it does create this personal connection to students before the class even opens. But you can also embed that in your syllabus itself. You provide course description in welcoming language in a more friendly environment. Oh, Michelle Pacansky-Brock. She was the one who developed this, and she has actually a public Canvas course that you can sign up for on creating a liquid syllabus. Let me see if that link is still good. There it is. So there's Michelle Pacansky-Brock, and I will put that link in the chat once I get to that. Yeah, and I can share the slides too. Well, I'll just share it in the chat. Actually, well, I'll get to that. Steve, if I don't do that at the end, remind me. Another point is, I'm not very good at this. This is something I know Rebecca has been much better at. These were slides I put together. If Rebecca had designed this, we'd have really nicely organized slides. But you know, the syllabus doesn't have to be ugly. A really good example of that is provided by Kevin Gannon. And I'll just share a link to that too. He has examples of some of his syllabi in here, and you know, his syllabi are actually really kind of impressive. They're well designed, they're very friendly. It talks about the foundational knowledge students are expected to have, how they'll be applying that knowledge, how it will be integrated with other types of material, and so forth. And then there's a course description, and he says from the catalog to let them know that this is something kind of formal. But then there's more materials there telling them what they need, how the grading's done, and it's a much more friendly approach than we generally see. And you could put in images in there to illustrate some of the concepts. So yeah, his site provides some really nice examples. I've never gotten to this level myself, but it's something to aspire to. And if I ever have more time, I hope to be able to, well, maybe not quite as nice as some of the work that he and many other people do, but something more friendly than, you know, the PDF documents I tend to share. And, you know, this actually came up in the Oz Professors Hangout a couple of days ago, where students were saying, well, I'm not going to be there for syllabus week, you know, with the suggestion that this is a waste of time. Syllabus day is something which is probably one of the least productive ways, of course. An interesting thing, just from a practical standpoint, is most of a faculty member's final evaluation or student evaluation of the instructor can be formed in those first minute or two of the class. And what you do in that first day of the class often sets a tone and sets students' expectation for the entire class. One of the worst things we could do is use that first day to go through the syllabus step by step. And many people do that. Jim Lang says he doesn't even share the syllabus that first day, or he doesn't discuss it at all. Ken Bain does something very similar. Instead, he highlights what the course will do, taking the concept of that promising syllabus and using the first day to say, this is what you're going to be able to do in this class. And these are the things you're going to do. Talk about the things that would be in the syllabus, but talk about it in a more friendly way. Maybe raise some questions, raise some intriguing questions and do a discussion in class. Maybe do some introductions, maybe do some other activities. If you're going to be doing group activities, maybe do some of those right now to help illustrate that. Get students discussing the content that first day, and don't waste it by going through things that students could read, especially if your document's going to look like the syllabus that many of our syllabi do. And some of mine have Many of mine have too. Less so now than they did a few years ago, but syllabus day is probably not the most effective way of using your first way of getting to know the students and for them getting to know you. And certainly reading through the requirements is not very effective. Focus on why the class is important, get students intrigued and interested and engaged, and that can help set the tone for the rest of the class. Ask students what their own goals are. It could be a general question. If you have a large class, and when I've taught a class of, well, recently it was a little small. I only had 189 last semester, but one of the first things I asked them is why they're in the class. And I had that come in as a free response question on an iClicker poll. And then I use a word cloud because with 189 responses, it's kind of hard to go through that whole list. But you could get a word cloud and see what are some of the most common words, and sometimes ask students why they're taking the course, and I'll have students do that. And a lot of them will give me reasons like, well, I really want to learn more about economics. And often that's not really why most of them are there. And eventually someone will say, well, I'm in this class because I have to be, that I have to do this. I don't like economics. I'm not interested in it, but it's a requirement that I have to complete. And that's often the most honest response for many of the students. But then what I'll do is I'll say, well, why is it a requirement? Why is it that students in your major are generally pretty much everywhere required to take courses in introductory economics? And then I'll start saying, well, we need to understand the economy. We need to understand how markets work. We need to understand how different markets, that the markets that we may be working with, function. And then you can turn that around and use that to help provide that motivation, saying, well, if the people who design your program think that this is important, maybe that suggests that this is foundational material that you're going to need to be able to be successful in, to be successful in your future careers or in your future education. And that can help set a much more positive tone than this being, a required course that they have to somehow jump through that hoop. And so, that often happens, especially with gen ed courses and courses that are lower level requirements or cognate requirements outside of a student's major. And, one of the things we always hear are all the jokes and comments about it's in the syllabus. There's all those t-shirts faculty can read saying it's in the syllabus and so forth. And if students are not reading your syllabus, it may be because they don't find it all that helpful. If you give your syllabus out on paper, that paper generally gets lost. It may be on a pile on a student's desk. It may have been recycled. It may be on the bottom of a waste pile somewhere if they are not recycling. But if you make the syllabus relevant and it contains useful information that will help students be successful in the course, then they're more likely to use it. And if you store it as a PDF or even as an HTML document in Blackboard, then it's much more accessible to students. It will always be there. And when they have questions, you can say, in class, you can say, well, if we go back to the syllabus and just remind them that some of the information they might need really is in the syllabus, and that syllabus may contain links to the rubrics telling them how they're going to be evaluated. It may contain information that will help them be more successful in completing assignments, and remind them of that so that they know where to look. And put some of the information in other places too. But if you make a syllabus relevant and useful to the students, and that's one of the ways where that liquid syllabus approach can be really helpful, that if students see that what's in the syllabus is not just a list of rules that they have to adhere to, or if they're freshmen, they've probably never seen a syllabus before they became first semester freshmen, and they have no clue what a syllabus even is. So you may want to just remind them that this does contain information that was put together to help them navigate your course, and remind them that it is a guide to the successful navigation of your course. Refer back to it. Include links to readings, learning activities, and so forth when feasible in there. Include rubrics, either the actual rubrics or links to the rubric, and helpful resources on course activities, so that if they're asked to do some type of assignment, if there are resources that you've created or that are available online that would be relevant to the assignment, share links to those so that they're directly there. And, you know, back when I started teaching here, generally, I was encouraged to have a one or at most two-sided syllabus document. If we're going to be posting it in an OMS, you're not saving resources by keeping it to a page or so. You know, putting more information on it and making the syllabus more useful, if that requires 5, 6, 10, 12 pages, that's perfectly fine, as long as the material there is going to be useful. You know, it's not using more resources to have a longer PDF, you know, in electronic PDF stored in the syllabus. And if you can put in more information that students find helpful, that makes it much more usable. And it can be a living document. Again, you know, it's not a final contract that locks the course in. If something that you designed into your course is not working, and students have told you it's not working and you agree it's not working, you can make a change. You know, one rule that many people, Kevin Gannon, for example, has said, you know, he makes changes in his syllabus as the course goes, treats it as a living document, and people who use a liquid syllabus do it too. But the one stipulation he tells students is he will never make a change that will be harmful to them, so that the only changes he'll make will be things that will make the course easier to navigate and allow students to be more successful by reducing the barriers they face. So if, for example, it's taking longer to complete something, you can change the due date on that in the syllabus. And giving students more time to complete work is not going to harm anyone. Or if you decide you're going to, for example, reduce the number of assignments, that's fine, as long as you do it in a way that's not going to hurt students who are hoping to be able to do better, you know, on a future assignment. As long as you don't preclude students by your choices from being successful, you know, students aren't going to be unhappy if they're not harmed by a change, if it makes it easier for them to be successful in your course. There are required stuff, and I've talked to Kevin Gannon and some other people about this, and the usual, well, there's a number of ways of doing that. That's not what I wanted there. Let me go back here. There's all this required stuff that we have to put in on accessibility, on Title IX and other things. You know, a simple approach, and I think one that most of us do anyway, is put that stuff at the end of the syllabus, but don't lead with all the reporting requirements and all the other things that are there. And frame them in perhaps a more supporting manner. You know, put in your own statement about inclusive teaching and about accessibility and so forth. You know, maybe tell students that if there's any barriers that they're facing or they expect to face, please contact you early so that you'll be able to help them address those and allow them to be successful before you put in the required disability statements and so forth. And here is a link to the required documents, and I'll just put that in chat. So we have a list here and a growing list. I think it's now complete, but here are some things that we need on, well, here we go. These are the things that are required. Most of them would tend to be there anyway, but there's the disability statement, the intellectual integrity statement. This hasn't been updated in a year. I think it's still accurate. I'll have to remember to go back and check, but in any case, make sure you do meet all the college's formal requirements, but do it in a way where you're framing it in terms which are friendly, which are not quite as legalistic as perhaps the formal statements. Include the formal statements, or what some people do is you have a link to these types of things. And so instead of putting all those documents, you put a link to a website that has all those. For example, if you have a liquid syllabus, you could put, these are the formal requirements required of all syllabi at SUNY Oswego, and then just link to each of them if you have them out there on the site. Kevin Gannon has a nice checklist on building an effective syllabus. You know, after reading it, does the student know who the instructor is, how you can contact the instructor, what department, where to find that instructor, where the offices hours are, how do you connect, and so forth. And there's a nice little checklist, and it's probably not bad to refer back to this. And I will put that in the chat as well. There's a lot of really good questions there that you could probably at least consider. And here are some more broad resources. Now, Steve asked for a copy of these slides. So I'll just put that in there. And then I wanted to leave some time for discussion. I didn't leave as much as I had hoped. There we go. Okay, so this is a link to the slides, which also contains all those other links. I think that works. Let's see. Yeah, this should bring you right back to the slideshow. Oh, it will let you make a copy of the syllabus. Okay, so, or of the slides. So that will give you a copy of these slides, including all the links. So just say yes, and it will put a copy in your own Google Drive as a slide, as a Google Slides. So that's what I had. Does anyone have any other suggestions or questions or recommendations? Steve, Josh?
I'll just say that, I mean, I don't know, it just seems so different to me. And so I guess, well, Josh is gone. I don't know, I don't know what practice I would love to. I mean, I wouldn't expect to. I'd love to see a syllabus that you use for 350, especially. I don't know if you've taught that in a while, but students are so used to the traditional syllabus. I mean, I think they might be nervous about this idea of, changing it as the semester goes along. Some of the principles I think that you mentioned are great, like the idea of, starting out with why the course is beneficial to them. That's in fact why I asked you to share the slides. I'm just,
I'm actually looking for, I'm looking for that. Let me see if I can find the syllabus. Mine doesn't meet all these things. This is somewhat aspirational for me too. These are what are considered often best cases. Let me go to the chat and copy this. Can I do that from here? I think I have to download it first.
Now, and of course, this way, some of the things you talked about are not directly related to the syllabus specifically, but
general principles, yeah.
The course, in terms of like, giving students opportunities to participate in activities that, a variety of activities and activities that would correspond to their strengths and things like that. Which I'm not saying is bad. I mean, certainly there are important things, but it's not specific to the syllabus.
Right. Although you can, right. Some of it is how you, I've got a new interface in preview that's not allowing me to download this. And that's bizarre. It's going to a preview on my syllabus rather than, let me see. It's in Dropbox, which is a problem, and I'm not being able to just do a simple download. I should be able to download though. Well, I can send you a copy of it later.
That would be. I'm just curious as to what you do, but I mean, and also, I mean, the idea of allowing the syllabus to be changed after the semester begins, that's also got to depend on the size of the course. Because I mean, and like you can't make changes related to each student of the course, especially since some of the changes might be conflicting with each other. So, it's like.
Right. So, for example, one thing you can't really change is often, especially in a large class, is the date of an exam or something similar, because any change is likely to conflict with someone's travel schedule or medical appointments or sports teams and so forth. So that's something I would very rarely change and only do it under exceptional circumstance, as if the college was closed on the day the exam was given, was to be given. But there are things you could do where you could decide, for example, if you had 6 grades, you might decide to drop the lowest grade to
Right.
give students opportunities, where that would be a change that wouldn't harm anyone, but it would take some of the pressure off,
Right.
or something similar.
And I did see, by the way, some of the things in your presentation in one of the AQ modules, or I don't even know how it's pronounced, AQ.
AQ.
Um, I really like, for example, the idea of letting the students participate in the setting of the class standards for conduct. And so that I
Yeah.
could see leaving to be edited, as this, on the first day of the class. Now, what did you say that? Because I didn't get it, that you do not recommend a syllabus day, or you do?
I don't recommend it in the form of simply going through the syllabus and reading it line by line. What I recommend is focusing on what Ken Bain talks about in terms of that invitation. Convey the content to the syllabus. Like, this is what this course will let you do. This is the objective of the course. And here's how we're going to get there. But do it in that way, rather than saying,
okay,
if you are a day late, you're, this
right,
paper, this will not be assigned,
right.
this will not be accepted. It's 1 minute late. This will, don't focus on all the legalistic things. Focus more on inviting students to the class and how we're going to achieve the goals of the class.
One thing that I've been, because I thought a lot, and one thing that I think I'm going to do in my labor relations class, and I wouldn't do this in employment law, but in labor relations, what I'm going to do is, after I do the attendance, I'll say, okay, what do you think you're going to learn in this course? What do you think you're going to get out of this course? What do you expect this course to be? Now, some of them will have the advantage because, I open a course on Blackboard before. So some of them may have looked, but I'm going to try to use that and then try to, and see, because labor relations is really interesting in the sense that for people who wind up working in a union firm, a firm of the employees are already represented by a union, they will get very different things out of the course than students who work at a firm where the employees are not represented. Well, anyway, so I'm just, that's, and so, but I appreciate the idea of not, just not going through. I think you have to do that at some point, but
and I think it was Jim Lang who said, he'll go through the syllabus, but not on the first day. He's more likely to approach the big topics there, because he doesn't want that sort of deadly, this rule, this rule, this rule type of thing. It's better if we could.
It was also my thinking, kind of as you said, to, on the first day, speak more generally about, what the course is about, why it will be useful to them, how it's going to be helpful to them in their future, stuff like that.
Motivated, get them interested, get them engaged, maybe even give them an example of a type of question, do a class discussion on that to intrigue them. And I was able to open it from Dropbox and then save it. And I think you actually already had access to this through Blackboard. I don't know if that you still have that, but it was posted there. Now,
that's right. I don't know if I.
You might still have that, but this was from last spring.
Okay. By the way, are you going to do that same project again this spring? I didn't sign up in the fall. I'm not sure why, but
it was a hectic fall.
I found it helpful in the spring.
I did too. I enjoyed it. I didn't get to visit other people's classes just because, it was.
Well, I don't know how I mean, are there like 30 hours in your day? Because I mean,
it feels like that sometimes.
So, but anyway, I do have another meeting at noon. So,
yeah.
But I do appreciate this, and I do appreciate some of the ideas. And I mean, I won't steal, but I'm definitely going to use. I look forward to looking at your syllabus
My
And just-
syllabus really doesn't reflect a lot of this. You know, it does have the contact information. I think my intro syllabus is probably better. But this one really doesn't, it's not best practices. It's more of a traditional syllabus.
Okay.
But yeah, so
But I
again, it's
definitely,
something
but,
aspirational.
again, between you and me, since we're the only ones here, I'm disappointed that more people weren't at a presentation like this. I mean, obviously we couldn't attend all the workshops, but certain things like this where, I mean, we're supposed to be a teaching school. It would be nice if more people would, but anyway.
Well, on the other hand, this is probably like the third or fourth time presentations like this have been given, and a lot of people did attend earlier iterations of these. So,
Right.
there have been a lot of people who've been exposed to this in one way or another. And many of the concepts here showed up in 2 or 3 other workshops earlier in little bits and pieces. A lot of what we're
Right.
doing is just regrouping them in
Right.
specific areas. So, and we get a lot of views on many of the videos. My guess is this may very well have 40 or 50 views within a couple of weeks,
Okay.
so.
But anyway, I do appreciate it. I definitely found this helpful. I definitely took some things out of it.
Good.
So thank you.
And again, it's something I aspire to. I haven't always done myself.
Okay.
So,
Take care.
okay, thanks.
Well,
Steve.
but again, even if I can do a couple of things that make it a couple of, it's like baby steps, it's like anything I do makes it better than it was. So
That's Tom Tobin, who wrote that book, Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, that +1 strategy. Just make one change, do one thing a little bit differently that improves it. And if you keep doing that, you'll see progress,
right. Thanks, John.
Okay, take it easy.
Take care.